Hello, painting students. Today we are going to start talking about perspective in space. I am just moving this week, so I have this big empty space that I'm working in. And I thought this was actually kind of ideal for our project. So I filled one of these empty rooms with a bunch of boxes. And I'm working with two types of light. I have natural light and I have a controlled light. We're going to start with just some sketches today, and don't worry about the setup, you're just going to work from this method first. First, we're going to work with 1 point linear perspective. As you can see, I've placed my horizon line or eye level, and I've placed my vanishing point. We're just going to start with looking at our cube and looking what happens when this cube moves around in space. So if it's directly in front of you on your horizon line, all you will see is a box. If the vanishing point is right behind it. However, if our box is to the side of our vanishing point, though still on our horizon line, we will see the front of the box, but we will also see the side. Now in 1 point, things are always facing us. So when you're drawing your box, you'll start with the front of it and you'll draw a square or a rectangle. This can be any size you want and any shape of square or rectangle. You will then bring the corners back to the vanishing point to create that side as it recedes from you in space. And you can make this box as long, as short, as tall, as fat, as wide as you wish. So you can place the side wherever you want, as long as it stays vertical against the vertical of the front. Great. I'm going to next show you what happens when your box rises above the horizon line, and you can see both the top and the side of your box. Remember to start with the front, no different than a box on your horizon line if it's floating above your horizon line. And then you'll start with the side again and bring the side back to the vanishing point because it's moving back in space. But now the bottom of the box is also going to move away from us in space. So you will also give that bottom line, you will bring it from the bottom corner all the way back to the vanishing point. And again, you can make it as wide or as short as you wish. I'll do the next a little quicker so we're not here all day. For this assignment, you should do several boxes at varying points to your eye level. You don't actually have to look at a box or cube, but it can be handy to have a book or shoebox or jewelry box, something handy, just to kind of see if it actually stacks up. The goal here is to eventually apply this to life. Alright, let's go on to 2 point linear perspective. And as you can see, I've given myself a horizon line and 2 vanishing points. In 2 point, the corner of your cube or your box is facing us. You can then bring the lines back, receding in space from the corner to your vanishing point. And then you can place your dividing line wherever you wish to make your box as big or small as you want to. I'm going to slow down on the bottom here a little bit to demonstrate a little more slowly. Started with the corner, put in the sides, gave myself that vertical, has to be vertical with the front vertical dividing line. And now I'm going to bring that corner back. And here it gets a little tricky. So you have to remember the back crisscrosses, or you can think of it as what the front does, the back has to follow. We'll do a couple a little faster. I would do several of these. Remember that the horizon line must remain the same, and also that it must be between both of your vanishing points. Right? As soon as something goes outside of the 2-point vanishing points, it starts to warp. Okay, we're going to draw a 1-point interior space. If you look up at your ceiling or down at your floor, you'll notice that your ceiling and floor lines have an angle to them, where the wall meets the ceiling or the floor. So we'll start with those angles and we'll draw our back wall to our room. I've added a window and I've added a door, and I've also sort of indented my door a bit. Remember that a lot of these things are really just boxes in one way or another, right? The inside of a room, it's the inside of a box. A house is just a big box. And anything that's part of that box or that house has to go with it. So for example, the front of the window, or the edge of the window closest to us is where you're going to start. And then you're going to bring the edges of the window back. The top and the bottom of the window will come back to that receding point, that vanishing point. I did the same thing with the door. And now I'm going to work a little on giving myself a floor. If you want to play around with it. So I started by making equal divisions all along the back. I didn't use my ruler, but you can if you want to be very precise. And then remember that as things go away from us, they get smaller and closer together. And there is a mathematical way to do this, but we're already covering so much today that let's just generalize that. We're just going to make things larger and further apart as they come close to us. Draw a little table in the back here. Remember, if you're drawing something in space, it cannot be levitating in the wall. So make sure your box that you start with, you could start with a box for this table, is sitting firmly on the floor and not kind of with the back part of it into the wall. It's a common mistake I see folks make. Give myself a little plant here. You can get decorative with it if you like. Over on the side, I'm just going to play around with making a little curved bench. Curved lines can go back in space as well, and the shape doesn't have to be a square to have perspective. So now we're going to try and apply a perspective to the space around us. And I have measured in on my sketchbook so that it matches the size of my canvas. And again, here's my room that I'm going to be painting, so I'm going to do my sketch from this space. You only have to do one, but you might do as many as you need until you have a good one. So I'm starting by finding my eye level. Reminder, this is whatever is across from you. So you're sitting there, and whatever's directly across from you is your eye level. Now I'm pointing up at the angle of the ceiling and the floor. I'm going to start with the angle of the ceiling, and I'm running the pencil along the angle of the ceiling to kind of find where might my vanishing points be as they go back in space. I'm going to do the same thing for the floor. Now remember, this is a 2-point box, but we're inside this box or inside this room. So it's going to be the opposite of starting with the corner. We are still starting with the back corner generally. We're going to start with our angles, and then we'll put in our back corner. But it's going to switch with which vanishing points it's going to. You are starting with that crisscross, right? Instead of starting with the front, you're starting with the back. So you're starting with the crisscross. All right. I'm going to put this in. And even if that's confusing to think about what does she mean starting with the crisscross, if you just used your pencil to angle and measure the general angle of the floor and the ceiling, you'll have a pretty good idea of what your angles will be. Now, when you're working with 2-point perspective in this way, your 2 points are going to be off the page, right? They can't be on the page because your space would get really warped and condensed. So we want to have them someplace off in space. I actually put a blank white canvas behind this sketch pad, and I just made a vanishing line continue on that and put my vanishing points, my 2-point vanishing points, out on the canvas. You could do something like this with a large piece of paper if you wanted to. Now remember, the canvas canvas we're working on is going to be 16 by 20. Our sketchbook is 9 by 12. So I brought it down a little bit so that it would fit the dimensions of the 16 by 20 by half. Alright. You want to take your time in this stage and make sure you're really getting your perspective correct. I know a lot of these videos, they look very quick because I've sped them all up. I've done them in time lapse or whatever, but this is, really, it takes me a while to get all of this down, and it should be taking you a while too. It takes patience. Figure out where my window is here. Now remember, the window is part of the wall or part of our cube, so it has to go with the structure. So the top of the window and the bottom of the window are going to go with the line of the ceiling and the floor, and the edge of the window is going to stay straight up and down with that corner of the wall. Alright, so this painting panel that's leaning against the wall pretty much goes with the direction of the wall because it's against it. It is leaning against it, and so it's jutting out a bit. It's a slightly different shape, but it still has the same vanishing points. Now these boxes on the floor are going to be slightly different. These are going to be in multi-point because they are not part of the building. So you want to start usually with the corner and then find the general angle. Remember that even though it has different vanishing points than the structure of the room, the horizon line remains the same. I'm going to repeat that because there's always someone who changes it. The horizon line remains the same. So you can see I'm trying to figure out where that vanishing point might land on the horizon line for this particular box. And then that box will come back to that vanishing point. They're both in 2-point perspective, the boxes I've drawn. So they're going to come back to their respective vanishing points, right? Multi-point just means there's more than one vanishing point present for the objects or the space in the image. Alright, I'm going to start laying in just a little bit of value. You don't have to get very detailed with this unless you find you have a lot of time and you feel like developing it. It just gives you a sense of what the light's going to look like in your painting. Also remember that we are working with foreground, middle ground, and background, and you want to kind of create this space or look for a space that has this present to it. So I have my boxes in the foreground, and then I kind of have my wall in the midground, and in the background out the window I seem to have some trees and a little bit of a porch out there. Right, here we go to our 16 by 20 canvas, and you want to use a big brush. You saw me holding up a sponge brush. Usually I bring those into class, but since we're not together this year, you can just use your 20 flat. You could also use just a kitchen sponge as long as it doesn't have any gook on it. I wouldn't wash any dishes with it after you use it on the painting though. And you're just going to pick whatever color you feel like emanates from underneath the area that you're painting. So in my room there was a lot of like yellow gold kind of coming from that room. It was kind of a morning scene that I was painting. The light was very natural light, morning light. And you can see I'm going through and trying to keep it even and consistent throughout. And I'm using this big brush to kind of lay in these big areas of color. This is called putting down a color ground, and it's going to give an ambience and kind of a feeling throughout, a cohesive feeling throughout the painting, a little bit of an atmosphere. It doesn't have to be very thick. It can be watered down, so it's kind of washy. The importance is that there's as little as possible actual white showing through. However, it can be very light. We've talked a lot about not letting the color of the canvas mix with the color of the paint, and that's okay here. It's all right if it's washy and light and the white of the canvas is affecting the color around a little bit. And one of the things that a sponge is great for when you're working with your color ground is just going back and kind of smoothing it all together. Sometimes brushes, they just always leave the mark in there, which is wonderful for making painterly paintings, but not great for kind of a consistent smooth color ground like we're trying to get here. Alright, next you're going to need your vine charcoal, and you want to keep your sketch handy. You're also going to need your ruler. Using your sketch and also just kind of eyeballing it, giving yourself some sort of phantom vanishing points out on either side if you're doing a 2-point area. If you've chosen to do a 1-point area, that is fine. It's up to you. It's where your comfort level is. 2-point will be more challenging. So you'll have these two. For me, I have these 2 phantom vanishing points out somewhere beyond my canvas. And I'm laying in the angle of my ceiling and my floor. And I have my corner in there. And just like I did with my sketch, I'm going to use the vine charcoal just to build the basic, we'll call it an underdrawing of our painting. Remember to keep that horizon line consistent. You can see I put a little bit of one in there just to give myself a reference. If the horizon line isn't consistent, your perspective won't line up. I am using both the eraser as well as a rag to wipe away the charcoal. Because it's vine charcoal, it very easily just wipes off, as we found. But it also integrates really wonderfully with the paint, and you can make changes really easily and not get stuck with it like you do with the compressed charcoal or with graphite like some people tend to use. We're going to start working with our paint now. Remember, you have all your colors as well as black and white and gray, and you also have your tertiary colors. So I'm going to start by just laying in the surface color of each area of the painting. I'm going to start with those big surface colors. I'm not worrying about light and dark. I might leave it a little more sparse with the paint here and there if there's a real highlight, because I have that wonderful ochre on there already that I've used as my color ground. But like you can see, the ceiling is very white, and in the setup, my ceiling is or the setup, the room I'm in, the ceiling's a little darker, but I'm going to go back and worry about that later. Very similar start to our color value painting. Another reason I was really happy I had all these boxes to work with is that they are prime targets for tertiary colors. So I can look at my tertiary color scales and I can think, what kinds of browns or olives can I match to these boxes? And every side might be a little different color. Your highlights, you might add some white to your tertiary color to get some of those highlights in there. You can shade your tertiary colors, tone them, and they're going to be a very effective kind of color-filled option instead of just, trying to mix up something gray. These are, this is the way people tend to make brown instead of just buying a brown paint. I try and hold off on the umber as long as possible, because something I find is as soon as we start putting it in our paintings, people just overdo it with the umber. And you have so many more options when you mix these tertiaries that just give so much more life to the painting. Alright, so now I'm going to start thinking about light and shadow. And what that means is just laying in areas of dark and areas of light. You can think about both color value in this painting as well as using tint, tone, and shade. So you have a lot of different options. Your best bet is to try and look at what color you see in front of you. Think about all the color scales. We've done so many different ones. All the color scales, all the color mixing we've done. And what color or combination of colors is going to address that area of the painting best, right? So for example, for my dark green wall here, these walls are very dark. I know that my ochre and my ultramarine blue make this very kind of earth tone green, right? A cerulean and a cad yellow are going to make something very vibrant, and that's not what I want. So I'm going with the ultramarine and the ochre. And then in some areas, I even added a little cad, right? Just to desaturate it a little more and give it a tiny bit more of that tertiary muted feeling. I'm also, though, using pure ochres for my highlights. You can see in that wall area, I've left it just pure ochre because the light in that area of the wall is very, very yellow. I don't want to go in there with any white. My ochre is yellow and bright and pretty high on the value scale, and it stands in wonderfully as a highlight. Be careful of not going right to achromatics when you have a white or black or gray object. It is incredibly rare that pure white, pure black exist in the world, especially in the world of painting. And they immediately kind of take something away from the painting. They flatten it out a little bit if there's too much there, especially of black. So I really encourage you to look at your white or black or gray objects and see what colors you can find in them. For example, this bookcase, yes, it is white or cream colored, but there were so many yellows in there. It was also picking up greens from the wall. A lot of times that will happen. A more neutral object or area, if there is a object with a lot of color near it, or an area with a lot of color near it, that more neutralized object will pick up some of the color. Just be aware of that. Another thing that sometimes happens, and I see this happening up in that little bowl, is that the complementary colors will show up in highlights and shadows. And in that little bowl, that little yellow ochre bowl, I see a yellow highlight with a violet shadow, which is a complementary contrast happening. Look for that moment too throughout. See if you can find any of those little hidden color harmonies embedded in there. Is a little bit of a different story than the room, and I want to paint what's happening outside before I go and develop the frame of the window too much itself. So I really kind of get my background, my furthest away background in there first. And I put a light blue wash over the ochre, I let it dry, and now I'm going back in and I'm blurring my eyes and looking at those trees outside, and I'm not worried about every leaf because, oh my gosh, that would be impossible to do with the time we have. So you're just going to map out, if you have any scenery like this, any landscape or foliage in the background, you're going to map out the large areas of dark first, and I used a dark green. Then you'll go to your next level of green and map those out. And then you'll go to the third level, I used a yellow. I also had a couple of tree trunks in there, and here and there you'll see little spots of purple where the tree trunks or branches are coming through. And also just these little lighter highlights on them, a little bit pink. They were kind of pinky yellow highlights on the tree trunks. And then finally, I'll go back in with a little bit of a light green or a yellow green highlight mixed with some white, tinted a bit, just to give it real life and real lightness. And I might even pop just a few spots, the blue of the sky, if it wasn't vibrant enough initially. When I'm done with that, then I'm able to paint the window and the porch railing and everything kind of in front of it, and it allows it to sink back a little bit in space. I worked on this painting for 2 mornings. I did have a controlled light source, and I actually ended up not having it on the floor where I showed you guys initially. I ended up putting it behind me. I needed a little more illumination so you guys could really see what I was doing. But I then also had the natural light source and that little area of kind of landscape, we'll say, out the window. So I really wanted to commit to painting during the time of day that this was happening. So I did this 2 mornings earlier in the week, Monday and Tuesday morning. And I got so into it, I was really disappointed that I kind of ran out of mornings to work on this. And I may come back to it and work on it more just for myself. If I do, I will share it with you. But I really enjoy interior space and working with natural light. Alright, I am going to use my tape for a couple of straight edges. I'm going to start with this corner in the back because it's really precise. And I'm going to be really careful with the tape. You want to make sure all your paint is dry or it won't stick and it will rip up and mess what you've done. And put it on there lightly, don't kind of press it down too hard. So I've mixed up, there was like a green shadow, a pretty dark green shadow. And then next to that, there was actually an area of really light. And then right in the corner, there was this pretty bright, almost pure yellow ochre highlight. So I kind of went through and just line those up. And you just have to make sure that your tape is right in the corner. A lot of the time, I'll see people do it just a little bit off, and it messes up all of your perspective. I do it for my ceiling line too, and I'm going to do it on both sides for the ceiling. So first I'm going to do it on the wall side and get that color correct on the wall and get that straight edge really nice and clean. I'm going to have to, once I take the tape off here, I'm going to have to let this dry before I can do the color on the ceiling, because I can't put the tape back over it. Okay, there are other areas I'll go and work on in the meantime. Just a reminder too that, we discussed in class that cubes or boxes, they tend, not always, depending on what your light's doing, but you might look for sort of 3 different values showing up. So one side will be the lightest, the second side will be a mid-tone, and then, the third side will be the darkest. So just pay attention if that is happening. Again, it's not always true, but a lot of the time it is. about the detail brushes yet. We really haven't gotten too much to the point that we've had to use them. I know some of you have used them for little details. But this is the kind of painting where I start to get to a point where I'm excited to use them. And you can see I'm using them in this little front box where I started to do the shadows in the top of it. I would start with the flat before you go in with that little tiny round detail brush. That's wonderful for getting like more of a tiny dot of a highlight, or if you're getting very tiny stippling texture. The flat's going to be better for kind of building small shadows and highlights. Sometimes I find people start looking at the round and draw too much with it. However, if you do have any shadows that sort of have a thin line and then a thicker line, if you practice in your sketchbook kind of dragging that smaller brush across the sketchbook, it can give you a really nice nuanced line. And I can demonstrate that in class. Alright, so I've taken the tape off the top, and now I can go in and work on that ceiling. As I said before, I really enjoy working with space, and I really enjoy working on this painting. It's exciting because you guys now have a lot of different color tools under your belt, and with a little bit of perspective, that ellipse practice, and understanding of light, this painting is an opportunity to make something that's really your own. Have fun with this one.